I'm not going to explain maybe beforehand what I'm going to be talking about. I have this very strong impression in the last maybe 3-4 years that companies building analytics products and dashboards, they start with a white canvas, and they first thought when they think about building analytics product is, okay, let's have a look at the data that we have in the database. And I get an impression that lots of companies get overexcited about the data that they have, and they inform their design through the data that they have in the databases, through the tables and connections between those tables and the metrics that they are gathering. So it's sort of a natural path from looking at the data set that you have already, or maybe that you are considering using, and then to just both of them clash, the white canvas with the data that you have. The magic happens, and we have just plethora right now of different analytics tools. At first, they might look very, very different, and it's just a simple Google search for analytics UI. So initially, they might look like they are different things, but when you focus on it, you'll see that most of them look just like this, and to simplify this further, they look exactly like this. Most of them have this layout of tails and little visualizations, little tables, but effectively, when you reflect on this, it says a lot about the designers and about the uncertainty that the designers are having. Like, there's plenty of uncertainty here. You're not sure what's important, what's not important, so you push all the data that you have in your database in front of the users. You don't know what's important. You say, we hope this data is going to be useful for you. You have to figure out how to use it. So it's like transfer of responsibility. This happens a lot with customization as well. When you are in doubt how the application should be used, what's important, what's not important, what are the use cases, just push this to the user and let them reorganize everything. Obviously, these applications are not easy to use then. So the current state of the art for me is something that I personally call database in your face. It's like database schema, database spec in your face. This is what we have in the database, and this is what we are going to give you. We hope you can use it. So I'm going to be talking about perspectives, and I found them very useful in my maybe last 4 or 5 years of work designing different analytics tools and different browsing and filtering applications. These are just simply ways of thinking about your data, users, and pixels on the screen. Because obviously, like any design, requires a lot of thinking, a lot of deep thinking, what you are trying to solve, what you are trying to do. User testing is very important. All these different approaches are very important, but it requires a lot of deep thinking. And deep thinking is not an easy thing to do. You need special devices and tools that enable you to think and progress further with your thinking. So I'm going to focus on just few of these perspectives. I have a long list of those. These are just examples, but I encourage you to develop your own perspectives. And the perspective is just a single aspect of the data, single aspect of the user, single aspect of the pixels on the screen. And then you can, using this aspect, you can judge, is this data the data that we should show, we shouldn't show it, maybe we should navigate to it, and so on and so forth. What I've been seeing, what I think is the truth, is that lots of companies cling to just only one aspect, one perspective, and they just go forward and implement and inform the whole design based on just one simple approach. But the idea is that you really move between these different aspects. They deliberately leave out other aspects alone and away, and they just focus solely on one particular thing. And one nice thing about going in circles like this is that very often you will find that you are stuck in design. You cannot decide what is important, what is not important. Then you switch to a different device, different tool of thinking, and then you can make a little bit of progress there, and then you can come back, and you go like in a spiral, and you keep pushing your product towards some hopefully good optimum. So the first perspective that I want to talk about is a natural one, which is user questions. You can look at your data and the design through user questions. This is an example of a mind map that we did for one of the analytics products. We listed a few hundreds of questions that people had. We collected them through interviews and transcripts, watching the videos also of people giving talks, talking to customers. And over time, we group them into important ones, less important ones. We assign different subject themes to them. And once you do this exercise, you can start seeing what's the primary data really that answers the primary questions, what's the secondary data that should not be on the main screen perhaps. So once you have that, once you analyze your data this way through the questions and answers that you want to give to people, then you can start deciding like the main questions and the primary data has to be easily accessible, no navigation required, big visuals at the top. And secondary questions, secondary data can require a little bit of navigation going from one place to the other and things like that. Another perspective is the behavior that you want to drive. It's the exact opposite of the previous one. In the previous one, you are looking at the questions that people have. Obviously, the danger with the previous one is that your product is going to be as good as the questions that your customers ask. So obviously, it's not going to be a great product. And lots of companies just only focus on what users need, what they are asking for. That's not going to give you, I think, a great product. This is something different. This is the behavior that you want to drive through your application. You'll have a good sense of what are the strong points about your data set, which data is of high quality, which data is the data that people derive value from, and then you can shape your interface in such a way that you drive people towards using that data, even though they might not initially think that they need it. So here's an example. I'm pretty sure you cannot see it properly, but it's a set of filters. It's a navigation. You will find this kind of navigation in lots of different analytics products where you can filter the data that you are looking at. This one is the same. It's exactly the same, but all the filters are collapsed in the filters button, and content type and networks are made more prominent. And what the previous interface tells you is that you can filter data in some different ways. You have just these different dimensions. This interface is just only an example. It suggests what you should be doing with your application. We already learned that application is strong at analyzing videos on Facebook. And they are just all simple filters, but depending on which ones you are making more prominent or less prominent, you are trying to drive some behavior. Here's another example from another tool that we built, which is you click on one of these cards and we create a panel of news stories for you about a particular subject like attacks, fires, and these panels, they require a very complicated set of filters and Boolean operators. And we found that people who have panels in our application are more engaged and less likely to churn. So we said this is the behavior that we want to drive. We want people to have panels, but they are really difficult to set up. It requires lots of like this combining filters and knowing Boolean operators, phrases, how things are being matched. So we said you just simple click and you get a panel. And we observed the increased number of panels being created this way and less churn. So when you think in the morning about your data, think what kind of behavior, not only what people need and they are asking for, but also what you want to achieve, what's your goal and what's the behavior that you want to be driving. And the ideal situation is going to be the situation where you have the data and you can actually look at the successful customers and then you can reveal what are the properties of their behavior and then see what's not happening for the people that are churning and try to replicate this behavior, try to push people towards this successful behavior, whatever that means. Another perspective is static versus dynamic. So one morning you can think about your data in terms of which data is static, which data is dynamic. What it means, let's say that we have a very interesting data that tells us a lot about our industry or a particular domain, but it is a static data. What it means that I come every morning to this dashboard and it's always the same. It's always the same. I have no incentive of coming back. I have to navigate somewhere. I have to use some filters to get to the interesting bit of information. And the one important aspect is that this is actually interesting and useful data. You learn something about the industry here. Whatever that is, you learn that there is some kind of a pattern. It's probably some things not happening on the weekend, things happening during the week. You are learning which geographical region is the most important for you, things like that. It's very interesting and important to start with, but there is no reason to show it on the main screen every day. So think one morning, think about your data, which is the data that is changing very quickly and yields itself to actions. So then you are giving a variable reward to your users. They are feeling like, I need to come back and see if something changed or something didn't change. And like things here, you are seeing that stock market prices going up and down, and there are spikes and kind of signals. Sometimes you come back and say, okay, I should not do anything. Sometimes I should purchase a stock or things like that. But things in terms of which data, obviously you want to be showing only valuable data and meaningful data, but which of the data is changing quickly, which of this data is pretty static. Another perspective is facts versus reasons. So one morning you can think about this aspect, which is, we have an example of a dashboard. Very often you will find information like this. What's the rate of change? 33% increase, 12% decrease. And that's nice. These are facts. Here's another application. We also have absolute numbers here, percentages as well. But very often in your data set, you will have also the explanation about why this is happening. So if you are building an application that is showing social engagements, for example, you might be able to show the stories that caused an increase of social engagements. Very often you will have this data, but you will just not simply think that you could use it. Think about, when you look at your data one morning, think which data explains some other data. And sometimes you are not dealing, when you are dealing with the rate of change or percentage increase, decrease, it's easy to think what caused it, but sometimes you just have absolute numbers, and there are no reasons to explain these absolute numbers. But then you can still categorize your data into the data that is giving you like this objective facts and data that gives you the breakdown of those facts. Like you have patients, maybe you have different types of patients, maybe you have different types of appointments or different times of the day that these appointments happen. So think which data is the factual data, which data is the breakdown or the explanation of the data. Another perspective is point of reference. When you look at your data one of the mornings, think about, can I provide people with a meaningful point of reference? People have to develop point of reference, and they will, in order to draw any actions, you have to decide yourself, is this a moment of time that we should do something, we should change something, or are we performing very, very well and we should maybe step back and just watch? So when you have numbers like this, you will not know if it is good or bad. Number of visits, 120,000 visitors sounds good to me if it was my website, but if it is maybe a big business, maybe it's very low. And people will have to develop this point of reference, and they will do it eventually, but maybe you can look into your data and develop this point of reference for them. So you can show, so you could show people, for example, how they were doing the last week. Maybe you can show the industry average. Maybe you can show how your competitors are performing, and tell them you are a little bit above the average, below the average. But that extra bit of information is typically there in your database, just not thinking about using that. Another perspective is past, present, and future is being neglected very often. When you look one of the mornings at your data, think about, can we not only show what has happened so far? Do we have any indicators in the database of what is going to happen next? And that's a very hard problem. Prediction requires very often machine learning. One of our products is actually trying to do that, where we have social engagements for stories, but we also, the dotted line is showing where the social engagement is going. So we predict, there is a certain accuracy connected to it, obviously, but it's typically a very hard problem to do. But so what you can do instead, you can show, not predict what is going to happen, but you can show people what is the expected outcome. So here is Chartbeat showing engagement during the day. So the gray line is showing what happened yesterday or the last week, and the blue line is showing what's happening so far today. So we are not really predicting what's going to happen, but we are showing what's expected. So you can, and this data is something that all of you are going to have in the database, because it's just past values for the same metric that you are showing. Other product doing the same thing, Parsley doing the same thing, not visible. Very useful, yeah. So this is an interesting perspective, which is what has to happen in 5 seconds. One of the mornings, think about your dashboard that you are designing. Look at it, count 5 seconds, and just remove it, and think, what is it communicating to me? What are we trying to communicate? What does have to happen in 5 seconds for us to say that we achieved some certain goal? Let's think about, this is one of the analytics products that we were designing in the past. This is about benchmarking your performance against competitors. You are New York Times in this case, you have BBC, Yahoo, ESPN, and what the metric is actually doesn't matter. So in 5 seconds, what we wanted to achieve with this design is time's up, but I think I still have 5 minutes. This design, our objective was, it's mostly bright, the top area is very dark. So in 5 seconds, what we wanted people to be able to see is that they can find themselves New York Times. New York Times being a client, for example, they are going to be sensitive to this label, so they are going to spot it very quickly. And then what they can see is that they are not winning. There is someone else doing something better than them, and there is someone else doing worse than them. And they are somewhere in the middle. And then it's off. In 5 seconds, you get this idea. You don't know what the metric was. You don't know details, but you get an idea. Okay, we are losing. We have to investigate further. And the whole dashboard later is built around answering that question. What caused that we are not number one, and things like that. So, and then naturally you can think, okay, what has to happen in 60 seconds? What has to happen in 10 minutes? And this will build a flow for you of how the data should be revealing itself, and how, and what's your strategy for teaching people about their industry, about their domain, or a problem that you have at hand. Another perspective is aggregate versus what's aggregated. So this is one simple observation, that if we were superhumans, we wouldn't need any aggregations. We would need raw data in Excel spreadsheet. You have 10,000 rows. You scan through them. You make sense out of it. You don't need any aggregations. And this simple realization brings you to a conclusion that each aggregation that you do in the system, or each visualization, should have a purpose and you should have a reason to put it in your dashboard. So you have to ask yourself a question. When we are doing this aggregation, is it because there is some pattern in the data that we want our users to know about? Is there maybe some trend happening from time to time? Are there events maybe happening sometimes in the data? Or maybe there is nothing, in which case you should be actually questioning if this aggregate or this visualization should be brought. So think about your data and the characteristic of different metrics and what they are communicating when you aggregate them. This is another perspective, which is together or apart. So you have typically, and I think this is a big fallacy of lots of dashboards currently, you have these different metrics coming from the database, different tables, and in each table is going to be representing one particular metric. So you have like you have visitors, or you have revenue, or you have page views, and then the natural progression from there is to have this dashboard with cards, where each card is representing one individual metric. I'll give you a quick example. Let's think that we want to go to BBC or New York Times, and we want to write an article with them about something. And we are investigating which publisher we should be going with based on how many social interactions they get. So we look, BBC is getting lots of shares on Facebook. We should go to BBC and write a story with them. But if I bring another piece of information to this visualization, which is number of posts that both publishers did in a particular time frame, then the conclusion is the very opposite. It's New York Times who is more successful. They are publishing less and getting more than half of what BBC is getting with 2,000 posts. And it looks obvious, but when you are designing analytics products, it's not that obvious, because these different pieces of information, they are coming from two separate tables. They have different units of measurements associated with them. So one of the mornings, I would suggest that you sit down and look at different metrics that you have and think, which ones could you bring together to exponentially increase the value of your data? Another example of, it's not visible, there is a line chart and there is a bar chart. Line chart is showing user activity, and bar chart is showing packages purchased. And there is one interesting point, which is more or less here, which is showing that the user activity is very low, but number of packages purchased is very high. So if you didn't bring this information together, the conclusions like this would never be drawn from your interface. So one thing to say is that there's plenty of visualizations that can combine different dimensions of information, so no reason not to do that. The last one that I'm going to cover is perspective that inform versus motivate. This is how you use your data. You can use your data to show some facts, or you can use some data to motivate people to do something. So Stack Overflow is a good example. They show lots of different numbers and answers that you gave, your reputation, things like that. But big part of their dashboard is actually devoted to motivating you to spend more time. They show that you are in the top 19% this year, and that your answers reached 10,000 people. Like, why is it important even? I'm like answering questions, helping people solve problems. Like, why are you telling me how many people saw it? It's just to motivate you more to spend time with the platform. So when you look at your data, think which data you want to have in your dashboard because it's factual, it explains what's happening in your industry, and which data do you want to use to motivate people to come back more frequently. So that's the end. Thanks a lot. I don't know, there's no time for questions, so if you have any questions, just...
I'm going to ask a quick question.
Yes.
Actually. I have another quick selfish question, and it's kind of about design again. So, yeah, you know a lot about data, it's in your head, and you're also quite technical, as well as being, you know, a great designer. You also know technical stuff, you know what a database is. So, designers, you've designers working for you, and they need to do a piece of work that, you know, ends up being a visualization, some sort of chart. How have you been able to get across all that information you know to designers so that you don't have to, you know, do it all in a meeting every time? And again, we were talking about style guides before. Have you in UseWhip written up any kind of like information for designers to get them up to speed on this stuff? Because it's all very easy, like when it's explained to you in a couple of lectures and you just get it, but that's really 10 years of insight that you've just given us right there. So what do you do about that junior designer who really needs to like get up to speed in a week on this stuff?
Yeah, so I think the best approach is to sit with people and really not teach them, but expose them to a certain way of thinking about things. And tell them that it's not about the aesthetics, it's not about how it looks, or it would be, if you tell me that it would be good to have this or that, it's not a reason to do it. It would be good, it would be not good, who knows. It's I think the most powerful way of starting this process is by thinking, what are we trying to communicate? And starting with the white canvas and deciding we are not going to put any data, we are not going to put any navigation, we are going to only have one page, no filtering, and if we put something there, it has to be for a reason. Tell me the reason. And if you don't convince me, or I don't convince you, we don't do it. And it's this certain way of thinking and the certain ways of looking at data in different ways that, like, over time, people learn what is the quality of work that we are doing, what's the way of thinking and the quality that we are trying to achieve. So it's about, I think it's hard. It's about sitting with people and molding them into certain human beings.
Love that answer.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.